My name is Rose Benedetto. I'm 73 years old from Boston's North End, and I'm about to tell you how my grandson Danny thought he could steal $47,000 from my credit cards to feed his drug habit while I was recovering from hip surgery, not knowing he'd picked the wrong nana to mess with. You see, I'd spent 32 years as a fraud investigator for Bank of America, specializing in tracking down financial crimes and identity theft cases that other investigators said were impossible to solve. It started 4 months ago when I had to have my left hip replaced. At 73, any major surgery is serious business, and the doctors kept me in Massachusetts General for 10 days to make sure I healed properly. My daughter Maria's boy Danny, my only grandson, had been staying in my house on Hanover Street, the same North End row house my late husband Sal and I bought in 1975, supposedly to take care of things while I was laid up. Danny is 28 years old, my daughter's pride and joy, and the one person in this family I thought I could trust with my life. When his father walked out when Danny was 12, I stepped in. I paid for his Catholic school education at Boston College High, helped him through Suffolk University, and even co-signed his first apartment lease when he graduated with a business degree. I should have seen the signs earlier. Over the past year, Danny had been asking to borrow money more frequently. First, it was $500 for car repairs, then $200 for emergency dental work, then $2,000 because he was between jobs and needed rent money. Every time, he'd promised to pay me back, and every time, I'd hand over the cash because that's what nanas do. We take care of our family. But the real warning sign came 3 weeks before my surgery when I caught him going through my purse while I was in the bathroom. When I asked what he was doing, he got defensive and angry, saying he was just looking for gum. Danny had never spoken to me with disrespect in his entire life. But something in his eyes that day was different, desperate, almost wild. The morning I came home from the hospital, everything seemed normal. Danny helped me up the front steps, made sure I had my medications organized, and even cooked me a pot of pasta e fagioli just like his nonno used to make. He seemed genuinely concerned about my recovery, asking if I needed anything, fluffing my pillows, and bringing me tea. "I'm going to miss staying here, Nonna," he said, kissing my forehead. "But now that you're home safe, I should probably get back to my place." I felt guilty for even having suspicious thoughts about such a devoted grandson. The discovery came 2 weeks later when I tried to pay for groceries at Bova's Bakery and my credit card was declined. Then my second card was declined. Then my third. Standing there in front of Mrs. Santangelo and half the neighborhood, watching the cashier shake her head sympathetically, I felt my face burn with embarrassment. "There must be some mistake," I told young Tony Bova, whose grandfather had been making pastries for my family for 40 years. "No worries, Mrs. B," Tony said gently. "Take the cannoli anyway. You can settle up next time." But I knew something was terribly wrong. In 50 years of having credit cards, I'd never once been declined for a $23 bakery purchase. That afternoon, I called Bank of America, the same bank where I'd worked for over 3 decades, where half the fraud department still knew my name. What I discovered made my blood run cold. My 3 credit cards had been maxed out with cash advances totaling $47,000. The transactions had all been made during the 10 days I was in the hospital, using cards that never left my possession because they were locked in my bedroom safe. A safe only Danny knew the combination to, because I'd taught it to him in case of emergencies. "Mrs. Benedetto," said Patricia Walsh, my former colleague who'd taken over my old position, "these transactions show a clear pattern of addiction-related theft. All cash advances were all from ATMs in areas known for drug activity, Roxbury, Dorchester, and Lynn. Someone with access to your cards and PIN numbers cleaned you out. Someone with access. The words hit me like a physical blow. There was only one person who had access to my safe, who knew my PIN numbers, and who had been staying in my house during those exact dates. My grandson, Danny, the boy I'd raised, educated, and loved like my own son, had stolen nearly $50,000 from the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him. But Danny made one fatal mistake that night when he chose to rob me. He forgot that his loving Nonna hadn't just worked at a bank for 32 years. I'd been the head of the fraud investigation unit, the woman who'd built criminal cases that sent identity thieves and financial predators to federal prison. Danny thought he was stealing from a helpless old lady who'd never noticed the money missing until it was too late to trace. Instead, he'd committed multiple federal crimes against someone who knew exactly how to prove every transaction, trace every dollar, and build an airtight case that would destroy his life completely. That night, I sat in my kitchen looking at the credit card statements spread across the table like evidence in a murder case. And I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I wasn't going to confront Danny. I wasn't going to give him a chance to lie, apologize, or promise to get help. I was going to let the federal justice system teach him what happens when you bite the hand that fed, clothed, educated, and loved you for 28 years. Danny had stolen from Rose Benedetto, a devoted grandmother. Now he was going to deal with Rose Benedetto, federal fraud investigator, and I was going to use every skill I'd learned in 3 decades of sending criminals to prison to make sure he lost everything he'd ever valued in life. The war was about to begin, and only one of us was going to walk away from it. Before I tell you how I destroyed Danny, you need to understand exactly what he threw away when he decided to steal from me. For 28 years, I'd been the one person in his life who never failed him, never let him down, and never gave up on him no matter what. When Danny was born in 1995, my daughter Maria was just 19 years old and unmarried. In an Italian Catholic family from the North End, this was still cause for shame and whispered conversations behind closed doors. But not from me. The moment I held that baby boy in my arms at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, I knew he was going to be the center of my world. Maria's boyfriend, I refused to call him Danny's father, disappeared before the boy's first birthday. While other grandmothers might have said, "I told you so," I rolled up my sleeves and became the father Danny never had. I was working full-time at Bank of America, but every evening and weekend was devoted to that child. I paid for everything: the crib, the stroller, the car seat, the endless diapers and formula. When Maria couldn't afford daycare on her waitress salary, I paid $800 a month for the best Catholic daycare in the North End. When Danny needed clothes, I bought them. When he outgrew his shoes every 3 months, I was there with my credit card at stride right. But it wasn't just money. It was my time, my energy, and my heart. Every Sunday after Mass at St. Leonard's, we'd walk to the waterfront, and I'd tell Danny stories about his nonno Sal, about how our family came to Boston from Sicily, and about the importance of hard work and respect for family. He'd sit on my lap in my kitchen while I made Sunday gravy, teaching him to roll meatballs and taste the sauce for seasoning. When Danny started kindergarten at the Elliott Elementary, I was the grandmother who volunteered for every field trip, every classroom party, and every fundraiser. The teachers knew me by name because I made sure Danny never missed a single school event due to lack of support or money. The real sacrifice came when Danny was 12 and Maria finally admitted she couldn't handle being a single mother anymore. She was struggling with her own problems: depression, bad relationships, and jobs that never lasted more than 6 months. Instead of letting Danny go into the system, I stepped up completely. "He can live with me," I told Maria. "I'll raise him properly." That decision cost me everything I'd been saving for my own future. I converted Sal's old den into Danny's bedroom, spending $8,000 to renovate it with new flooring, built-in bookshelves, and a desk where he could do homework. I bought him a computer when they were still expensive, $2,400 in 1998, because his teachers said it would help with his education. But the biggest sacrifice was Boston College High School. Danny was smart enough for BC High, but the tuition was $12,000 a year, money I didn't have. So I took out a second mortgage on my house, the same house Sal and I had worked 2 jobs each to pay off by 1995. For 4 years, I paid $48,000 in tuition, plus uniforms, books, field trips, and all the extras that came with giving a boy a proper Catholic education. Every month, I'd get that mortgage payment bill for $780, money that came directly from my retirement savings. While other women my age were planning cruises and buying nice things for themselves, I was eating pasta 3 nights a week to afford my grandson's education. When Danny graduated from BC High in 2011 with honors, I cried harder than his own mother. He'd been accepted to Suffolk University with partial academic scholarships, but he still needed $18,000 a year for the remaining tuition and expenses. Again, I found the money. I cashed in my life insurance policy, $40,000 that Sal had left for my security, and handed it over without hesitation. "Nonna, are you sure?" Danny had asked when I gave him the check for his first semester. "Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you," I told him, repeating what my own immigrant parents had told me. "You get your degree, you make something of yourself, and this family moves up in the world." During his college years, Danny lived in my house to save money on dormitory fees. I cooked his meals, did his laundry, packed his lunches, and helped him with his studies every night at the kitchen table. When he needed textbooks, I bought them. When his laptop broke, I replaced it. When he wanted to go on spring break with his friends, I gave him $1,500 so he wouldn't feel left out. In 2015, when Danny graduated from Suffolk with a business degree, I spent $3,000 on his graduation party. I rented the hall at St. Leonard's Parish, hired Maria's cousin to cater, and invited everyone from the neighborhood to celebrate my grandson's achievement. That night, watching Danny in his cap and gown, surrounded by family and friends, I felt like every sacrifice had been worth it, but the sacrifices didn't end there. When Danny couldn't find a job immediately after graduation, I supported him for 8 months while he looked for the right opportunity. That meant $2,200 a month for his car payment, insurance, food, and spending money. When he finally found work at a small accounting firm, I co-signed the lease on his apartment in the Back Bay because he didn't have enough credit history. Over 28 years, I calculated that I'd spent $247,000 raising Danny, money that came from my salary, my retirement savings, my life insurance policy, and the equity in my house. Money I'll never see again, because I spent my golden years making sure my grandson had every advantage I never had growing up poor in East Boston. But the money was never the real sacrifice. The real sacrifice was my dreams, my retirement plans, and my chance to travel and enjoy life after Sal died. While my friends were joining senior groups and taking bus trips to Atlantic City, I was attending Danny's college graduation, his work events, and his birthday parties. I gave him everything a parent could give: love, support, education, opportunities, and unconditional devotion. I taught him right from wrong, respect for family, and the value of hard work. I showed him what loyalty looked like by never missing a single important moment in his life. And when I needed him most, when I was recovering from surgery and vulnerable in my own home, Danny saw his opportunity to steal everything he could get his hands on. He didn't just take my money that week in the hospital. He took 28 years of love, sacrifice, and trust, and he traded it all for whatever drugs he was putting in his veins. That was Danny's choice. Now he was going to live with the consequences of choosing addiction over the grandmother who'd given him everything she had to give. What I discovered next made me realize that Danny's theft wasn't a moment of desperation. It was the culmination of months of planning and deception that went far deeper than I ever imagined. The morning after I found out about the credit card fraud, I did what any former bank investigator would do. I pulled every financial record I could get my hands on. What I found painted a picture of systematic betrayal that had been going on for nearly 6 months. My first call was to Patricia Walsh at Bank of America. "Pat, I need you to run a complete transaction history on all my accounts for the past year. Personal favor, one former colleague to another." Within 2 hours, Pat had sent me a detailed report that made my hands shake as I read it. The credit card theft was just the tip of the iceberg. Starting in October, someone had been making small cash advances from my cards, $300 here, $500 there, amounts small enough that I wouldn't notice among my regular monthly charges. By December, the amounts had increased to $1,000 and $1,500. In January, right around the time Danny started asking for more frequent loans, the cash advances jumped to $2,000 and $3,000, but the real betrayal was what Pat found in my checking account records. Starting in November, someone had been using my debit card for ATM withdrawals, always in amounts just under $500 to avoid triggering fraud alerts. The locations were damning. ATMs in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Lynn, areas I'd never been to in my life, but areas well known for street-level drug sales. "Rose," Pat said when she called me back, "whoever did this knew your banking habits intimately. They knew exactly how much you typically spend each month, what would look suspicious, and how to stay under the radar. This isn't random fraud. This is someone who's been studying your patterns for months, someone who knew my patterns. Someone who ate dinner at my kitchen table twice a week and heard me complain about high electric bills and grocery costs. Someone who'd watched me balance my checkbook at that same table for years." That afternoon, I called my neighbor, Mrs. DeMarco, whose kitchen window faces my back door. "Stella, I need to ask you something confidential. Over the past few months, have you noticed Danny coming and going from my house when I wasn't home?" There was a long pause. "Rose, honey, I didn't want to say anything because it wasn't my business, but yes. Quite a few times, actually. Usually in the mornings when you were at your doctor's appointments. He'd be there for maybe 20 minutes, then leave with a backpack." My stomach dropped. Danny had been using his key to enter my house when I wasn't home, going through my financial papers, memorizing account numbers, and planning his theft for months. But the worst discovery came when I checked my home security system. The ADT system Danny had convinced me to install for my safety after a break-in 2 streets over. I'd never bothered checking the logs before, but now I pulled up 6 months of entry records. The pattern was clear and damning. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, when I was at physical therapy for my arthritis, Danny's entry code had been used to disarm the system. He'd stay for 15 to 20 minutes, then rearm it before leaving. Those were the days he was searching my house, photographing my financial documents, and stealing information he'd later use to rob me. Blind. I realized that the home security system I'd trusted to protect me had actually been documenting my own grandson's preparation to steal from me. That evening, I called my old friend Lieutenant Mike Torino from the Boston Police Department, someone I'd worked with on dozens of fraud cases over the years. "Mike, I need advice on a delicate family matter," I said, explaining the situation without mentioning Danny's name initially. "Rose, what you're describing is classic addict behavior," Mike said. "The gradual escalation, the insider knowledge, the timing around a medical procedure when the victim would be most vulnerable. This person has been planning this for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity. What would you do if it were your own family?" I asked. Mike's answer chilled me. "Rose, family or not, what you're describing is multiple felonies: identity theft, credit card fraud, elder abuse, and burglary. If this person is addicted enough to steal 50 grand from their own grandmother, they're not going to stop here. They'll keep escalating until someone stops them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times Danny had hugged me goodbye after Sunday dinner, knowing he was planning to rob me. All the times he'd asked about my health, my doctor appointments, and my surgery date, information he was collecting to plan the perfect window for his theft. The next morning, I made a decision that broke my heart but saved my soul. I called Danny's mother, Maria. Maria, we need to talk about your son. In person, today. When Maria arrived that afternoon, I laid out all the evidence, bank statements, transaction records, security system logs, and ATM receipts. I watched my daughter's face go through the same emotions I'd experienced: disbelief, shock, recognition, and finally, devastation. Ma, there has to be some explanation, Maria said, though I could see she knew there wasn't. There is an explanation, I replied. Your son is a drug addict who's been systematically robbing me for months. And last week he finished the job by stealing $47,000 while I was in the hospital recovering from surgery. Maria started crying. What are we going to do? We aren't going to do anything, I said firmly. Danny made his choice when he decided to steal from the woman who raised him. Now he's going to face the consequences of that choice. That evening, Danny called to check on me, just like the loving grandson he'd pretended to be for months. Hey, Nonna, how are you feeling? Is your hip getting better? I'm fine, Danny, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Everything's fine. That's good to hear. I was worried about you. You know I love you, right? I know exactly how much you love me, Danny, I replied. I know exactly what that love is worth. He had no idea that I'd spent the entire day building a federal case against him, or that by the end of the week, his life as he knew it would be over forever. Danny thought he'd stolen from a helpless old lady who'd never figure out what happened. Instead, he'd declared war on a former federal fraud investigator who had never lost a case in 32 years. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 8 years since retiring. I put on my best Navy business suit, pinned up my gray hair in the professional bun I'd worn to work for 3 decades, and walked into the FBI field office in Boston's government center like I was reporting for duty. Special Agent Jennifer Martinez had been my point of contact during my last 5 years at Bank of America, when we'd worked together on complex identity theft rings targeting elderly victims. When her secretary announced me, Jennifer came out personally to greet me with a hug. Rose Benedetto. What brings the legendary fraud hunter back to my office? I need to report multiple federal crimes, Jen, and this time, it's personal. For the next 2 hours, I laid out Danny's crimes with the precision of the professional investigator I'd been. I had organized everything: bank statements with highlighted transactions, security system logs, ATM surveillance photos that Pat had pulled from Bank of America's files, and even a timeline showing the escalation pattern that proved premeditation. Rose, this is textbook elder financial abuse, Jennifer said, reviewing my documentation. Credit card fraud, identity theft, burglary. And given the amounts involved, we're looking at federal charges that carry 10 to 15 years in prison. That's what I was hoping you'd say, I replied. Jennifer studied me carefully. Rose, you understand that once we open this investigation, there's no taking it back. Your grandson will be arrested, prosecuted, and almost certainly convicted. His life will be destroyed. His life was destroyed the day he decided to put drugs before family, I said firmly. I'm just making sure the consequences catch up with his choices. That afternoon, Jennifer assigned the case to Detective Sarah Chen from the Economic Crimes Unit. Detective Chen was young, maybe 30, but she had the same sharp eyes I'd recognized in good investigators throughout my career. Mrs. Benedetto, I've reviewed your evidence file and I have to say, it's the most organized victim documentation I've ever seen, Detective Chen said. You've essentially built our entire case for us. That was the point, I replied. I want this prosecution to be airtight. Over the next 2 weeks, Detective Chen and I worked together like the professional team we were. We pulled surveillance footage from every ATM Danny had used, cross-referenced the timestamps with my medical appointments, and traced every stolen dollar to drug-related transactions. The breakthrough came when Detective Chen discovered that Danny had been selling my credit card numbers to other addicts. 3 different people had been arrested in Roxbury with fake IDs bearing my information, cards Danny had created and sold for $500 each. Mrs. Benedetto, your grandson wasn't just stealing from you, Detective Chen explained. He was running a small identity theft operation using your personal information. This goes from theft to organized criminal enterprise. But I wanted more than just criminal charges. I wanted Danny to lose everything he valued in life, the same way he'd tried to take everything from me. I called Robert Santangelo, the attorney who'd handled Sal's estate and who'd known our family for 30 years. Bob, I need you to file a civil lawsuit for every penny Danny stole, plus damages for emotional distress and elder abuse. Rose, you understand that even if we win a judgment, an addict with no assets probably can't pay it, Bob warned. He has assets, I said. He has that apartment in Back Bay that I co-signed for, the car I helped him buy, and a business degree from Suffolk University that I paid for. I want all of it. Bob drew up papers seeking $150,000 in damages, 3 times what Danny had actually stolen, plus interest and punitive damages for elder abuse. Under Massachusetts law, I could also force the sale of any property I'd helped him acquire, but the most satisfying part of my revenge was yet to come. I called Danny's employer, the small accounting firm where he'd been working for 2 years. Mr. Patterson, this is Rose Benedetto, Danny Benedetto's grandmother. I need to inform you that Danny is currently under FBI investigation for financial crimes, including identity theft and elder abuse. I thought you should know before you hear about it from other sources. There was a long silence. Mrs. Benedetto, are you certain about this? Mr. Patterson, I'm the former head of fraud investigation at Bank of America. I'm very certain about this. I see. Well, thank you for the notification. We'll handle this appropriately. Danny was fired that same afternoon. Next, I contacted his landlord in Back Bay, a property management company I'd dealt with when co-signing his lease. This is Rose Benedetto. I co-signed an apartment lease for Daniel Benedetto, and I'm formally notifying you that I'm withdrawing my guarantee due to his criminal activity. You might want to require immediate payment of all outstanding balances. Within a week, Danny received an eviction notice demanding 3 months' rent up front or immediate vacation of the premises. The final piece of my strategy involved his car, a 2019 Honda Civic that I'd co-signed for and helped with the down payment. I called Honda Financial Services and explained that the primary borrower was under federal investigation for financial crimes. Ma'am, if you co-signed and he's facing criminal charges, you have the right to request immediate repossession to protect your credit rating, the representative explained. That's exactly what I want to do, I replied. By the time I was finished, Danny was facing federal criminal charges, a civil lawsuit that would bankrupt him, unemployment, eviction, and repossession of his car. In 2 weeks, I'd systematically destroyed every aspect of the life I'd spent 28 years building for him. But the sweetest revenge was still to come. I wanted Danny to know that his loving Nonna had been the architect of his complete destruction. On a Thursday evening, exactly 3 weeks after I'd discovered his theft, Danny called me as usual to check on my recovery. Hey, Nonna, how are you feeling? I'm feeling much better, Danny, I said calmly. In fact, I'm feeling better than I have in months. That's great to hear. Listen, I was wondering if you could help me out with something. I'm having some temporary financial problems, and I was hoping— Danny, I interrupted, I think there's been some confusion. See, I know about the $47,000 you stole from my credit cards while I was in the hospital. I know about the months you spent breaking into my house to photograph my financial documents. I know about you selling my personal information to other criminals. I know everything. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Danny, are you there? Nonna, I can explain. No need to explain, sweetheart. The FBI already has all the evidence they need. You should expect them tomorrow morning. The phone went dead. Danny had hung up, but it didn't matter. By tomorrow evening, he'd be in federal custody, and the grandson who'd betrayed my love would finally understand what happens when you bite the hand that raised you from birth. The FBI arrested Danny at 6:47 a.m. on Friday morning as he left what was about to become his former apartment in Back Bay. Detective Chen called me 20 minutes later with the news I'd been waiting to hear for 3 weeks. Mrs. Benedetto. Daniel Benedetto is in federal custody. He's being charged with identity theft, credit card fraud, elder abuse, and operating a criminal enterprise. Based on the evidence you provided, he'll likely plea bargain or face 15 to 20 years in federal prison. What about the other people he was working with? I asked. We arrested 3 associates this morning, the people buying credit card information from your grandson. It turns out he'd been running this operation for almost 6 months, targeting several elderly victims in addition to yourself. Several elderly victims. My grandson hadn't just betrayed me. He'd been systematically robbing multiple seniors, using the techniques he'd perfected by stealing from his own grandmother. That afternoon, Detective Chen called with an update that made my victory complete. Mrs. Benedetto, your grandson wants to make a deal. He's willing to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. And he's asking if there's any way his grandmother might consider asking for leniency. Detective Chen, you can tell my grandson that his grandmother died the day he chose drugs over the woman who raised him. Rose Benedetto, a federal fraud investigator, has no interest in showing mercy to career criminals who prey on elderly victims. The legal proceedings moved with the efficiency I remembered from my working days. Danny's criminal attorney, an overworked public defender, tried to argue that addiction was a disease requiring treatment rather than punishment. Federal prosecutors, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres, presented the evidence I'd helped them build. The case was so airtight that Danny accepted a plea bargain after just 2 court appearances. 12 years in federal prison, full restitution to all victims, and permanent felony status that would follow him for the rest of his life. But the criminal case was only half of my revenge. The civil lawsuit proceeded simultaneously, and Robert Santangelo pursued Danny's assets with the ruthlessness of an experienced estate attorney. Danny's Back Bay apartment was sold to pay his debts. His Honda Civic was repossessed and sold at auction. Even his Suffolk University diploma was legally seized as an asset that had been purchased with stolen funds, though that was more symbolic than financial. The total recovery was $89,000, not just the money Danny had stolen from me, but funds seized from his criminal enterprise and the liquidation of everything I'd helped him acquire over the years. Under federal asset forfeiture laws, I was entitled to treble damages for elder abuse, which meant Danny's crimes had actually made me money. The community response was everything I'd hoped it would be. When word spread through the North End that Danny Benedetto had stolen nearly $50,000 from his own grandmother while she was recovering from surgery, the reaction was swift and unanimous. Father Marcello mentioned the case during his Sunday sermon at St. Leonard's without naming names. But everyone knew who he was talking about. There is no sin more grievous than betraying the family members who sacrificed everything for your welfare, he said, looking directly at the pew where Danny used to sit with me. Mrs. DeMarco, Mrs. Santangelo, and the other neighborhood women who'd watched me raise Danny from birth made sure everyone understood what had happened. In a tight Italian community like the North End, Danny's reputation was destroyed forever. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months after Danny's sentencing, when Maria came to my house to beg for my forgiveness on behalf of her son. "Ma, he's learned his lesson," she pleaded. "He's been clean for 8 months now. He wants to write you a letter apologizing for everything." "Maria," I said calmly, "your son spent months planning to rob me while I recovered from surgery. He stole nearly $50,000 from the woman who raised him, educated him, and loved him. He was running a criminal enterprise that targeted other elderly victims. This wasn't a mistake, it was a business decision." "But he's family," Maria insisted. "Family doesn't steal from family," I replied. "Family doesn't break into your house while you're in physical therapy to photograph your financial documents. Family doesn't sell your personal information to other criminals." Danny stopped being family the day he decided I was just another elderly victim to exploit. A year later, I used part of the money recovered from Danny's criminal enterprise to take my first real vacation in 28 years, a 2-week trip to Italy to visit the Sicilian village where my grandparents were born. Standing in the small church where my great-grandparents were married, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since before Sal died. I'd learned something profound about the difference between love and enabling, between family loyalty and being a victim. For 28 years, I'd confused unconditional love with unlimited tolerance for harmful behavior. I'd enabled Danny's sense of entitlement by never letting him face real consequences for his choices. But when he finally crossed the line from taking advantage of my generosity to committing serious crimes against me, I'd chosen justice over sentiment, consequences over forgiveness. Today, I'm 75 years old, living comfortably in my paid-off house on Hanover Street, with a healthy savings account restored by the money seized from my grandson's criminal enterprise. I volunteer at the senior center, teaching other elderly residents how to protect themselves from financial fraud, sharing the hard-won wisdom I gained from my own experience. Danny will be released from federal prison when he's 42 years old, if he serves his full sentence and doesn't get additional time for prison infractions. He'll emerge into a world where his criminal record will follow him forever, where he'll struggle to find housing, employment, and respect. Some people say I was too harsh, that I should have shown mercy to my own flesh and blood. But I sleep peacefully every night, knowing that I taught Danny the most important lesson of his life. Actions have consequences, and betraying the people who love you carries the highest price of all. The last thing I want to say to anyone watching this is simple. Love your family unconditionally, but never let that love make you a victim of their crimes. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is ensure that the people you care about face the full consequences of their choices. Danny thought he'd found the perfect victim in his devoted grandmother. Instead, he learned that some women spent their careers teaching criminals that there's always someone smarter, more experienced, and more determined than they are, and sometimes that someone raised you from birth and knows exactly how to destroy everything you value in life. Every story we tell carries the echoes of countless others who have walked similar paths. This grandmother's tale is now part of your journey too. Subscribe to continue collecting these precious life lessons together. Remember, we're all just stories in the end. Let's make them meaningful ones.